MCI procedure number 6, brick measuring and counting. Brick measuring and counting. When we first visit the site for a job that we expect to quote, and certainly before we undertake any stain work other than a test panel, we must assess the size of the job. Otherwise, how will we know how much to charge for the work? If the job involves staining brick or the mortar joints surrounding brick, the size of the job should be assessed by measuring and counting the brick in the walls or the portions of the walls to be stained. The best practice is to have 2 people count and measure, or 1 person count and measure twice. Measuring brick. Measure a few brick in each wall. Record the length and width of the face of each brick to the nearest 1/8 inch. Be sure to measure at least 1 brick with each combination of color and texture. For example, if the wall consists of red wire cut, yellow wire cut, red smooth, and brown smooth brick, measure a few brick of each of the 4 types. Measure the height, measure the length. Pay particular attention to areas that appear to have been built at different times or with different runs of brick than the others. The brick may be different in size, even if they're found in the same wall. If some brick are not rectangular and not square, measure all sides and measure the distances from each corner to the 2 nearest corners. Also, measure the height and width. Counting brick. To count the brick in a wall that does not have windows or doors or other areas without brick, divide the wall into rectangles and triangles. Then count the brick in each rectangle and in each triangle and add the numbers you get. Mark the areas with tape if necessary. To count brick in a rectangle, first count all the brick that touch one vertical edge of the rectangle. Look at the slide. You'll notice that if you count down along the edge of the slide, you can count 10 rows of brick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Next, count all the brick along one horizontal edge. So in this case, let's count along the bottom of the rectangle. So we would count, we see that there's a partial brick, and then there's 1 full brick, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And maybe we can count that partial brick as a half, so that's 10 and a half. Now multiply the 2 numbers together. 10, counting vertically, 10 and a half, counting horizontally. Multiply those together. 10 times 10 and a half is 105 brick. Use your calculator on your phone if you need to. Now to count brick in a triangle that has 1 vertical side and 1 horizontal side, follow the same procedure but multiply differently at the end. First, count all the brick that touch the vertical edge of the triangle. So count down, as you see in the illustration, 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, all the way down to 17 rows, counting vertically from the top down. Next, count all the brick along one horizontal edge. In this instance, it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, almost 9 full brick. But over at the left edge, you have a partial brick. So let's call that 10. So now you can multiply the 2 numbers and you will get 10 times 17 or 170. Now here's the difference between doing the rectangle and the triangle. If it were a rectangle, if this triangle were a rectangle, then the 17 times the 10 would give you all the brick in this rectangular space. But this triangle is exactly 1/2 the size of that rectangle. It's cut in half by this line. So when you're dealing with a triangle, you multiply this number times this number, and then you either divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2. So you get the number of bricks in this triangle, rather than the number of bricks in the entire rectangle. Okay. All right, what if you have a triangle that has a flat base, but it does not have a perfectly vertical side? Well, the procedure is very, very different. It's very, very similar, I'm sorry. It's exactly the opposite of being very, very different. What you do is, instead of counting the brick along the vertical side, you just count how many rows of brick you have to the highest point in the triangle. So in the illustration, in the slide, you see that the highest point on the triangle is right about there. And then you can count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to row 16. And that tells you the whole height of the triangle. And then you can count along the horizontal bottom edge, the longest edge, just like you did with the other examples. And we can count 1, 2, 3, about 10 full brick there. If you multiply the vertical number by the horizontal number, you get the number of brick that you'd have if this were a rectangle, with this base and this height. But because it's a triangle, you actually get the number of brick in it is not the same as this rectangle. It's actually half of that. And the way you can see that is that this rectangle is divided into two. If you go from the base directly up to the peak of the triangle, you divide this rectangle into two parts. This part over here is divided in half by this line, and the brick that are showing here below the line are exactly half the amount of brick you'd have if you filled in this whole rectangle. Same over here. This brick, the brick that's showing there, is exactly half of the brick that would fill this entire rectangle over here. So put it all together, this triangle of brick is half of this number times this number, or half of 170, or about 85 if I did that correctly in my head. So the formula is the same as before. The triangle formula is always the base times the height divided by 2 or multiplied by 1/2. Now most stain jobs will involve walls that are interrupted with doors or windows or other areas that should not be stained. And what you do with those is you count the brick in the rectangles just like I showed you, you count the brick in the triangles just like I showed you, and then you count the brick in the door, you count the doors or windows or other areas where you have no brick. Maybe you have a rectangular area with siding or something like that. You count that in terms of brick. You say, how many brick wide is that? How many brick tall is that? If it's a rectangle, you multiply those two numbers together. If it's a triangle, you multiply the two numbers together, and then you divide by 2 or you multiply by 1/2. Then you take those numbers, the numbers for the windows and doors and other openings, and you subtract those numbers from all the numbers you got for the rectangles and triangles of brick. And that is procedure number 6, measuring and counting brick.